Zoom out, zoom in. What's happening across the procurement community right now? And what is one highly successful company doing in procurement? What's working, what isn't, and what's next? Zoom out, zoom in. That's what the next hour is all about, the state of procurement and the CPO. I'm Danny Thompson from apexanalytix, and I can't wait for you to meet our two experts, Chuck Stefanosky and Andrew Bartolini. And Chuck is the Director of Strategic Sourcing and Procurement at Independence Blue Cross, and Andrew is Founder and Chief Research Officer for Ardent Partners. And we bring them to you today because, really, quite simply, they've been so helpful to us at Apex over the past few years. Really, for 30 years, Apex has been delivering value to the payment end of the P2P process through AP recovery audits and overpayment and fraud prevention solutions. But in the last 5 to 10 years, we've really extended those solutions to support the very front end of the P2P cycle with supplier discovery and supplier onboarding and ongoing supplier management solutions. And really, to be successful in that space, we needed to make sure we weren't just speaking the language of accounts payable, but we needed to make sure our solutions met the needs of procurement. So, long story short, we really value procurement voices, especially when they're leaders in this space. And that brings us back to Chuck and Andrew. We asked our clients and contacts who they rely on for best practices in procurement. And in addition to their peers, they referred us to Ardent and the meaningful work that Ardent has been doing for procurement and the strategic sourcing buyer. And after getting to know Andrew and his team, I really just couldn't agree more. They are so knowledgeable in this space. And today, especially, Andrew is going to be sharing some results from Ardent's recent CPO Rising survey on the state of procurement and the CPO. And then Chuck is going to share his insights on that research taken from his experience leading what has been a really impressive transformation at Independence Blue Cross over the last 4 to 5 years. And throughout that time, they've increased their P2P automation, they've been tightening controls, they've improved supplier engagement, and they've used their automation journey to drive much closer alignment between procurement and AP. I can't wait for you to hear that story as well. And really, that's where we'll start. Chuck, why don't you lay the groundwork? Tell us a little bit about Independence Blue Cross.
Danny, thanks for the introduction, and I'm happy to be here today to share insights with all of you. As Danny mentioned, I lead the Strategic Sourcing Group at Independence Blue Cross. We're located in Philadelphia. We have a national scope, although we're started out as a regional health insurance company. We've been in the business for about 80 years, employed 10,000 plus employees across the US. We insure 26,000 employer groups, which equates to about 7.8 million members. And our total revenue last year was $19.2 billion. Next slide. This gives you a little bit of a flavor of what we do in the community as well as nationally. So again, 106 million members, 1 in 3 Americans are covered by a blue plan. So that's really all the blues that are across the US. The beauty of the blue brand is that although all the plans are independently owned and operated, we all accept each other's members to provide national coverage. Just some additional stats. We serve 80 of America's Fortune 100 employers. We have the largest provider network, which really helps us to leverage some awesome care and some great rates. And then we use the we use the industry's largest national data resources.
Thanks, Chuck. Just a bit about apexanalytix for those of you who may not be familiar with Apex. Over 250 of the world's largest, most successful P2P organizations like Independence Blue Cross in every major industry use apexanalytix software and services to protect their spend and create just these hyper-engaged supplier relationships. And just last year, a lot of money went through these solutions. These companies protected $6 trillion in spend and recovered or prevented over $3 billion in overpayments. And they also onboarded or managed over 4 million suppliers using our supplier portal software. Key to all of this is our, pardon me. Key to all of this is our database of golden master records for over 40 million suppliers to the Fortune 500 and Global 2000, and real-time integration with over 650 external data sources to ensure data accuracy, completeness, and to predict supplier behavior. Value is driven through our 4 major products. We provide more commercial AP recovery audits than any provider in the world. Our clients use our First Strike software to conduct their own overpayment audits, oftentimes before payments go out the door. And Apex Portal is the highest rated supplier relation management and risk solution on the market, with the fastest supplier adoption of any supplier portal in the history of P2P solutions. Smart VM is our AI-driven machine learning solution that cleans, enriches, and continuously monitors vendor master data in real time. So now, Andrew, tell us a bit about Ardent and the report that we're going to be reviewing today.
Great. Hello and good day to everybody. Danny, thanks for the kind words and great introduction. Just briefly about Ardent, right? So, first of all, I'm very excited to be here today to present the world premiere findings of our 16th annual State of Procurement research study. Ardent Partners, for those of you that don't know us, we're a research and advisory firm based in Boston that's laser focused on supply management. We look at the strategies, the processes, and the technologies that drive business value across the sourcing, procurement, accounts payable, and supply management processes. We publish research like what we're going to cover today that focuses on best practices and how to improve performance. We also publish research that guides organizations on making smart technology investments. If we go to the next slide, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the research process, right? So, Ardent's been around for 12 years. So this is actually a research study that I've been working on for several years prior to Ardent being founded. And I've managed about 100 similar market research studies. And I just want to share just sort of briefly the rigor that we bring to bear in this type of effort, right? So the data that we're presenting today is drawn from a web-based survey enhanced with direct CPO and procurement executive leader interviews. We actually cull through the research to ensure that everybody who's answering is a procurement practitioner, and we really work work in a pretty detailed way to ensure that the questions that we're asking are comprehensive in scope, and that we're getting sort of the full color of the research as well. If we look at the research demographics on the next slide, what we can see, and I think it's important just to give you some context, right? So the data that we're presenting today, is almost wholly coming from procurement and supply chain. It's at a very executive level, right? So these are leaders who know and understand their organizations and are making the decisions within them. The data does tilt towards large enterprise, which we define as companies with annual revenues of greater than $1 billion. The data does tilt towards North America, but does have a global scope in its entirety. From a vertical standpoint, very horizontal in nature, right? There's no single vertical that I think represents more than maybe 10 or 12%. And so, with that, right, you see a picture of the report that we're going to be publishing next week. I'm still, putting the finishing touches on that, but I'm really excited to give you really the sneak preview and the world premiere of the key findings of the report. And so, the past year, as we look at COVID-19 and the impact, right, a very different year, very different year for everybody, right? Not just people working in procurement, right? The COVID-19 pandemic has taken no prisoners, right? Companies, economies, regions, communities, families, businesses have all been impacted. We did a survey last May, sort of a flash survey, and we saw that about 70% of enterprises had been significantly impacted, and as we've gone out over a longer period of time, we do see that about 2/3 of organizations have been facing an impact, and that's clearly not a surprise. When the pandemic first hit, right, there was probably in the past 12 months more written about the supply chain, the global supply chain in the past year than in the past decade, or maybe even in the past 20 years that I've been working in this space. But what we've seen is that over time, right, organizations have started to better understand the true impact of this, right? And we're dealing with a situation where the pandemic has appointed winners and losers by industry and by company within industry. But looking at it more broadly, what was very interesting for us, and one of the first key findings, is that 35% of organizations are challenged on the sales and cash side, right? And so, it's no longer just simply about the supply chain. I think that, talking to CPOs and procurement organizations in the early days of the pandemic, they were dealing with two primary challenges. The first was to ensure business continuity, right? When you have unclear visibility into your global supply chains, and it's not certain what's happening from an operational standpoint, many red flags were raised, and we saw that with the challenge of getting PPE, into the places most in need, just as one simple example. But the other challenge that organizations were facing was the work from home, right? The reason why those of us that live in big cities are dealing with, long commute times, is the fact that most people still work from their offices. And, many CPOs, while they were dealing with the challenges of finding new supply and assuring supply and making sure that their own workers had what they need to continue working, they're also dealing with pretty significant challenges of dealing with a workforce that was not used to working from home. And so, while supply chain has faced many challenges, what we see is that the rest of the organization and certain parts, particularly on the sales side, dealing with pretty significant challenges. And Chuck, you're an organization that is national in its scope. You face many challenges that I'm sure were common and some that were unique. Talk a little bit about how you and your team dealt with the pandemic.
Thanks, Andrew. I would agree that the top two items there, sales, revenue, cash, and internal operations and processes, and then I would say workforce, were probably our main concerns. And some of the things that we had to put in place was probably about 5 years ago. We put together a strategy to really go paperless within procurement. We did that because back during, I guess, Hurricane Sandy, there was some outages in the Philadelphia area, and we were working remote for about 2 weeks during that time period. And we said, you know what, we don't want that ever to happen again. We never projected the pandemic. I don't think anybody did, but we made some choices to go really put our workforce on a remote work plan where all of our employees worked from home a day a week, just to make sure they knew how to do their job from home. What we did as relates to the software we got from Apex, we put in the supplier registration for our supplier portal, I guess you would call it, software, as well as dynamic discounting. And both of those things were very helpful during the pandemic. Our suppliers were able to register via that link in a totally paperless manner. And prior to putting Apex in place, it was very paper-driven, faxed, emails, you name it. Phone calls to register a supplier, to get their bank account set up, etc. Luckily, we had all that in place, and it was really a well-oiled machine prior to the pandemic, as well as the dynamic discounting software, where our suppliers, when they're facing issues with, again, sales, revenue, cash, they were able just to go into the portal and select early payment and receive a discount on the invoice and be paid immediately or whatever time frame they were looking for. So it was really helpful for us to help maintain some cash, as well as for our suppliers to be able to get paid early when they were facing all the challenges that we've all faced during the pandemic. So those are just a few examples of the things that some of the challenges we've seen during the pandemic.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I mean, it sounds like you were a little bit ahead of the curve with technology already in place. What we saw in the research is that there were a lot of organizations that were not as well equipped and well supported by their solution providers in the space. And when we look at where our CPOs focus today, right off the bat, right, when you're working from home and you're dealing with a highly collaborative business function where you're reliant on other stakeholders across the organization, and then other third parties outside of the four walls of your own enterprise to be able to communicate and to collaborate and to transact. When you're dealing in a manual, paper-based, or even phone-driven world, that presents a lot of challenges. And so it's no surprise that the top CPO strategy for 2021 is an investment in technology. And what we have seen over the past 3 or 4 years more broadly is that the term digital transformation really has started to take hold. And when I started in the space a little bit more than 20 years ago on the technology side, the standard approach was we're going to introduce automation to drive efficiencies. Just take the same processes, map them to the technology, and get an efficiency dividend. What we're seeing today is that organizations are utilizing technology to reimagine what it is that they're doing, to enhance what it is that they're doing, and to come at it in a more intelligent and more effective way, not simply driving efficiencies. What we see here, right? So, when we think about the challenges of the market today, and for the 35% of companies that are really struggling from a sales standpoint, right? That typically plays to that means that the companies are going to start focusing on the things that really play to the strengths of the procurement organization, right? And that's controlling the things that you can in fact control. And so with technology in place, with a level of influence in place, with the ability to be responsive to the big shifts that we're going to see over the next 12 to, who knows how far out this goes, but, as procurement organizations continue to focus on agility and utilizing technology to drive that, we see lots of opportunities for procurement to add value over the next year specifically. And Danny, right, so coming at it from the technology side, I'm sure that you and your team have been busier than ever.
Yeah, for the reasons that you mentioned, lots of times people are coming at automation as a way to make a process more efficient, but people are learning, it's just becoming obvious that automation does so much more than that. Bottom line is that it eliminates human error, and really in the areas of procurement and payables, so much of what can go wrong in those spaces are the result of human error, just people not following the rules or trying to circumvent the rules. And the technology can really just make sure that your policies and your rules are being enforced. In the context of COVID-19, for example, automation's been enabling these new operational modes of work. If you're working from home or really working from anywhere, you can be working on the rim of the Grand Canyon as long as you've got an internet signal and get your work done. Technology helps remove your dependency on a physical location, proximity, running down the hall, meeting face to face. And there's this connection not only between automation and controls and enablement, but also agility. More agile organizations are those that have created these efficiencies. They've reduced manual processes, improved controls, and done more through digital transformation. They've really been able to pivot and engage and support their suppliers more rapidly. So it's a really good question, why automation is having an impact right now. Just a little aside, Andrew, we've had some good questions coming in, and I would encourage everybody on the call today, if you have any questions, just enter them in the Q&A or chat functions in WebEx, and we'll get to them at the end.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so I also found it interesting, and I'll just sort of note, right, that, procurement organizations, when the last big sort of, global event, the Great Recession of the, 2008 to 2010 timeframe, procurement was, the CPO's priority, 9 out of 10 CPOs prioritize savings over everything else. And what we've seen over the past, I guess, 12 years or so, is that procurement, the understanding of procurement at the executive level by non-procurement professionals has really grown in its understanding of the value that procurement can bring, not just to the bottom line, although the bottom line continues to be very important. And we expect that as we move into sort of the next phase of the economy and the still sort of continued uncertainty, that if the stock market were to have a significant impact, we expect that organizations are going to really start to apply more pressure on driving some cost savings through to the bottom line. But when we look at where CPOs are focused from a strategic standpoint in 2021, it's no surprise, right, that they're focused on the areas that present the greatest challenges today, right? When you have almost uniform work from home requirements in most developed nations, and sort of the ebb and flow of how that has been, right? I've talked with many CPOs who are also own the corporate real estate footprint of their organizations, and they've already begun to sort of rethink what it means to have a workforce in place in the office and what those requirements are, right? There are different restrictions that you may come home where if you have a positive test in your office, you may have to roll out testing at a very expensive rate. And so organizations are still trying to sort of figure this out. But what they've always known is that if you're not engaged with the key stakeholders, the people that have the budgets, if you're not talking to them early on and understanding what their requirements are, your ability to influence and drive value through a sourcing process, or through simply, through the product development process, or through a cash management process is significantly constrained. And so, procurement, because it touches all parts of the organization, you get a great view into the business and an understanding of the business. But if you're not engaged at the right level, if you're not engaged at the right time, what you have are some significant challenges, right? You become more of an order taker than a strategic partner. We see obviously that CPOs are focused on technology, and the pandemic, I think, has certainly underlined the importance of technology. But I think that with the new workforce that has entered, right, the millennials that have come to work, right, their expectation is that the way that they do their jobs at work should mimic at some level how they live their lives at home, right? And so if they are dealing with a 15-step process to order something, basic and non-strategic, and they can do in 3 clicks at home, right? That dichotomy needs to be solved, right? And so, again, we see the importance of technology, and it's not simply just introducing the technology itself, right? You have to have the right processes, you have to have the right collaborators, you have to have sort of the vested interests of people actually getting onto the technology itself. And so, Chuck, 2021 hits, we're still in the pandemic. Where are you leading your organization? What are the things that you're focused on this year? What are your strategies?
Well, I think what I could speak to really in this slide is really what we did from with our procurement team and our buying team when we put the Apex software on in our infrastructure. We really took the opportunity to reimagine the process and to reimagine our workforce. What I mean by that is we looked at the supplier registration and dynamic discounting processes that we had in place, and it was very paper-driven, very manual. And we had people in the procurement team, outside of the AP team, within people in our AP group, as well as what I mean by outside, in our compliance group, registering suppliers. It would take us 8 to 12 weeks to register a supplier. And what we did was we reimagined it and said, you know, what would it look like if we put this software in place to register suppliers and to capture some dynamic discounting, and maybe we could merge the AP teams and the technical buying teams together, eliminate a lot of the repetitive work, and really reimagine the workflow and really be able to register supplier much more efficiently and more accurately than we had in the past. I have to say it was a big success for us. We went from anywhere from, I guess, 8 to 12 weeks to register a supplier, which is going to tell you it's kind of an embarrassment, to now we can register a supplier within a day if we need to, frequently in less than 2 or 3 days from when a supplier submits to the portal, they're approved and ready to place orders on a purchase order. As well as dynamic discounting, we're able to take advantage of discounts much more effectively. There's not so much back and forth between procurement and the AP team trying to figure out what suppliers are eligible or contracted for discounts. We really use that software that we've gotten through Apex to really help us manage that. And I got to tell you that the team effort has really been awesome. We've been able to maintain the headcount levels and increase productivity since we've had the software in place. It's really worked out well.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic, right? I mean, what I hear there is you introduce technology to drive efficiencies, but also change what it is and improve what it is that you were doing, right? So the introduction of dynamic discounting, I think, you know, when you look at, if you're one of those organizations of 35% that are struggling on the sales side, and as, you know, whether or not credit tightens or not, right? The ability to sort of control your own destiny becomes much more important. And where procurement can start to partner with AP, can start to partner with Treasury, you can start to unlock a lot of value. I know that last spring we were hosting an online, you know, sort of live stream event, and one of the CPOs that I had tapped to participate had to back out at the last minute because he's a CPO of a big CPG company, you know, selling primarily through big box retailers, which had all essentially closed down. Those big box retailers told him that, you know, they were going to extend their already 90-day payments and an additional 90 days. So he and his team were sort of frantically going around trying to figure out how they could pass along some of that pain to some of their suppliers. And, you know, if you were doing that in a fully manual world, which they were, you know, they were all in, their team the entire time, and really didn't have a way to sort of unlock some of that value in a more automated way. Last point would be on the supplier, on the front end supplier side, right? So I don't know if IBX needs to radically rethink its supply chain, but there are many organizations that are reliant on, you know, strategic you know, categories or commodities or even products that are coming from, you know, halfway around the world, and from, you know, a basic security standpoint or from a basic supply assurance standpoint, are rethinking their supply chains. We don't expect that there's going to be a dramatic overhaul of supply chains, you know, this year or even next year because of the switching costs, but the ability to you know, go from a 12-week to 1-day process to enable your suppliers onto your platform really speaks to the agility that organizations are seeking as we move through, you know, this, what I have to say is still going to be an uncertain time. But, you know, let's look at some of the hurdles that CPOs are facing. You know, procurement is doing well, and on the next slide, what we see is that there are still some challenges you know, that sit before them, right? So procurement is in a very different place than it was at the time of the Great Recession, right? We see a chief procurement officer, you know, by name, by role, or you know, sort of by definition, in about 95% of organizations today, right? Even as you start to go downstream to, you know, companies at $250 million in revenue. That doesn't mean that the work is you know, is done, right? You know, we see challenges on the technology side, right? Is you know, I guess we're not showing to you today, but when you read the report that publishes next week, you'll see that the technology adoption rates are still far from uniform, right? A fully automated source to pay or source to settle process, which is what we at Ardent call it, is still an exception and not the rule. And so organizations, you know, have challenges when they have gaps in their technology. You know, we see from a budgetary standpoint that procurement is not sitting at the front of the line, right? There are other parts of the organization that when it comes to investment, you know, procurement has to sit in its place, and this despite the fact that, you know, what we've seen, that when supply management technologies are well deployed and well used, that the ROIs on that investment is as high as any other technology investments in the organization. The last hurdle just to comment on briefly, is the talent side, right? And so CPOs over the past decade, they've seen the scope of their operations and their responsibilities expand pretty greatly. They haven't seen the headcount grow at that same rate. And there's the procurement market, right? The job market right now, if you are a manager, director level in procurement, this is a very hot job market for you. And getting the right talent into organizations has been and continues to be a challenge. And so if you are less than satisfied with your jobs today, recommendation is to look and see what else is out there. There's a premium being paid for procurement experience and expertise. Danny, clients that you have, I'm sure you're seeing these types of challenges, and I know you're plugging in to help them.
Yeah, it's funny that the first item on this list, challenges in aligning processes and systems. Did a webinar recently with our SVP of Portal Solutions and Technology, and we were just talking about how complex some organizations are and what their landscape looked like. And I asked him, what was the highest number of systems we'd had to integrate into a single supplier portal? And he said he was working on one right now where a client had over 60 ERPs that they were trying to integrate into a single front-end supplier portal, so that the suppliers would have one place to go and wouldn't have to worry about how to interact with 60 different systems that were being used in the P2P process on the back end. And he said the big message here is one that our technology, our first strike technology for controls and now our portal are addressing, is companies need to rein in all of these systems so they can get a single version of the truth, so they know how to act and have really 360-degree visibility. And then they have the ability to do things that really make use of the data that data that's in all of those various systems, but they can also pull levers and institute controls that can be implemented in a central location, but control what's going on throughout their organizations. So that sort of trying to enable multiple systems and control multiple systems through a central system, it's just super powerful. Yep.
No, I was just going to comment, right? I mean, so, right, you can look at this from both sides of the equation, right? So having that central, single source of truth around your suppliers can provide extraordinary value on the saving side, on the supplier rationalization side. But when you start to look at the supplier side as well, we just experienced, different categories or different products where extreme shortages, right? In those scenarios when supply is constrained, you don't want to be the high cost customer, right? You don't want to be the customer where, based upon which business unit is ordering from that supplier, the supplier has to deal with 10 or 15 different interfaces to manage the order, to go back through and ensure that it's getting paid, right? You need that centralization of information. It's a benefit to the suppliers, and it's a very different story than when you and I both started in this industry years ago, right? Suppliers being enabled on a platform came with the dread of, oh, they're going to come after us and it's going to be costly and the systems don't work, right? We're in a very different space, but I cut off your last point there.
No, that's okay. I think probably it'd be good to pull Chuck in, and Chuck, just tell us a little bit about the business case that you guys looked at when you were putting your portal in place, the budget constraints that are described above. How should companies build their ROI story in order to address these issues?
Thanks, Danny. I guess the initial hook for us, or the initial interest, was when Apex happened to reach out to us, did a cold call, and they talked to us about dynamic discounting, and that got our interest. We looked at that and we said, you know what, we're not really good at capturing discounts today. If we automate that, it looked like there was some pretty good ROI, just some basic numbers when you guys ran some numbers from us based on our spend and the commodities that we purchase. So that was the initial interest, and we thought, this is going to be great. We'll do the dynamic discounting. But then when we got into the project, we realized that our ERP data just wasn't any good. It really wasn't relevant. I mean, the most accurate, we had accurate, obviously, banking information and addresses, but contact information, emails, phone numbers, that type of information that you really should have in one central place really wasn't. It was put in place when a supplier registered. Supplier was there 15 years. The contact information was the same, right? The banking would have been updated, but the sales contact, the AP contact, all those contacts were really stale. So when we looked at it, we said, wait a minute, we got to fix our data before we even can do the dynamic discounting. And by the way, let's reimagine this process and the people that manage it. Let's just blow it up. Let's take a look at it and say what makes the most sense, right? There's that old adage, if you automate a bad process, you'll get bad results quicker, right? And we didn't really want to do that. So we said, okay, even though we were like chomping at the bit to get dynamic discounting set up, we had to spend significant time getting our data correct, getting our contact information corrected. So what we did was, as I mentioned earlier, we looked at an organization that combined our AP group with our tactical buying group. We saved some headcount there, which led into the ROI. And then the other part of it was really dynamic discounting. Once we got our data correct, when we sent out our invitations and then the dynamic discounting started to pick up speed, we really saw quite a bit of the ROI come right back from the dynamic discounts taken from our suppliers. Something to note is if you decide to do a dynamic discounting program, the Apex consultants will give you a lot of advice about what percentage of discount you should expect from what supplier based upon their historical information. And part of that's pretty good. But the biggest learning point for us was the unknowns. The suppliers that we thought never would take a discount take some of the biggest ones. The ones that we thought would take a discount are not. And net, we're doing better than we anticipated. But I would just say, if you decide to put something like dynamic discounting in place, offer it to everyone, every employee, every supplier in your database, you'll be surprised the ones that will take the discount compared to the ones that won't. But really, that's where our ROI came from two places. Again, dynamic discounting, and then from reduction in headcount of about 1.5 to 2 FTEs, and replacing that paper-driven process with the supplier portal process offered by Apex.
All right. So then next is about supplier management maturity. Andrew, what were the results you got there?
Yeah, so I think what we see here on this slide is generally reflected in the research across all of the different questions that we ask, right? We see a small subset of organizations, right? The group that we call the best in class, and it's the top 20% in our research. They're doing things generally very well. Doesn't mean that even those top performers don't have room for improvement, but we see the rest of the procurement organizations moving forward, but at a slower pace and with much less reach. And so I think that what's interesting from a technology adoption standpoint is that supplier management, when you look at the technologies, right, supplier information, performance, risk management, things like that, they're not the highest adopted. But one of the things that was interesting in our research this year, and I think the pandemic plays a role in this, is that they are the area that have the highest interest. And so we're expecting much more focus and investment in this area, right? It makes sense that organizations, if you can't process a purchase order electronically, if you don't have visibility into your spend, you have to take care of some first things first. But once you have some of the basics in place, there's a lot of interest in driving more value in the relationships and how you manage your suppliers.
Yeah. So Chuck, where do you fall? Where does IBX fall on this chart?
For us, we're up in the top end where it's basically the mature, high value, less than 5 years for supplier management. Our program's about 3 years old, 3.5 years old. We have a director now of supplier management that we hadn't had in the past. We scorecard all of our suppliers, our top two tiers of suppliers. It's roughly about 100 suppliers, 130 suppliers make up the most risk to the organization. And really, what we saw the value in supplier management is that we're able, when we scorecard all of our suppliers, we roll all those scorecards up into a few pages and share that with our President's Council that reports directly to our president and our president. And it provides a really nice snapshot to show our senior leadership, the suppliers that they're all familiar with. They're typically our high spend, high risk suppliers, and be able to say in a real objective way to say, hey, you know, this is how they've scored. We realize this supplier has been here 15 years and we spend, you know, X million with them. However, they're not performing as well as they should be, really. And it's having that data-driven packet of information to share with our executives really helps us to drive change and increase the performance of the supplier, or provide evidence to replace the supplier with, you know, with a competitor. So for us, that's really what we've used it for, is to really measure, monitor risk, and then make changes where appropriate.
That's great. And then the next slide provides a little bit more detail about supplier management and risk findings in the report. Just for the sake of time, I'll just jump ahead. You know, we find that risk has been an increasing priority in the procurement space, and our clients have been really looking for more and more functionality that's automated around risk. So companies maybe have been able to manage their highest spend suppliers and manage risk around their highest spend suppliers through a manual process. But with so much of the supply chain being disrupted over the last year, people have been trying to find ways to manage risk really way down the spend curve, and automation has been the key. And most companies aren't aware that there are tools available now that allow you to manage different segments of suppliers with appropriate risk management tools. And so they're learning about it, and our clients have been having us add more and more into our solution. So one example is automated bank account ownership validation. There's been a huge increase in fraud over the last year in the P2P space, and one of our clients brought to us this idea of engaging in real time with the banking system to confirm that the bank account that is on the supplier's vendor master record that you're making payments to matches the owner of the bank account that the money is going to. So does the supplier own the bank account? And so they introduced us to the consortium of banks that they had been working with previously, and we built that into the solution. So now when suppliers change their bank account information, the ownership gets validated in real time. And then there are other connections to integrated D&B credit reports, maybe rapid ratings, integration with government regulatory bodies to make sure that suppliers are who they say they are and are authorized to do business. So everything from financial and fraud and reputational, as well as compliance controls, are being automated so that a larger swath of the supplier base can be managed. Now, key procurement benchmarks that really ask the question, is procurement delivering? Andrew, you want to run through this chart with us and tell us about the trends associated with them?
Sure. So we'll, just sort of the highlights here and much more detailed discussion in the report, when it publishes. What we've seen, right, and I tried to, I put a little trend line next to the key metrics, right? So these are, some of the metrics that, we think are very important for procurement organizations to track from a performance standpoint and from an operational standpoint. We use the measure spend under management as a primary metric to understand the level of influence, the ability that procurement has, that a procurement department has to impact spend at an organization, is really, I think, at a baseline level, right, the best view into how mature is a procurement organization and what is the opportunity to add value. We haven't seen large spikes in the savings numbers. Again, I think that's tied somewhat to the stock market more so than the pressing, challenges on the sales side. Sourcing down a little bit, I think that that's, down, but not significant. Compliance numbers continue to be generally mediocre, in a word, right? There's lots of opportunities for procurement organizations to look internally and without significant investment, drive compliance and thereby drive savings and bottom line value. Danny, Chuck, any thoughts here?
Yeah, maybe Chuck. I know one thing that's not on this chart that is really important in procurement, especially over the last year, is diversity programs. And I know you've been leading the diversity program at Independence Blue Cross for some time. Why don't you describe what you're doing there and what kinds of successes you've been finding in that space?
Yeah, our thanks, Danny. Our organization has a supplier diversity program that's 30 plus years old. It's led a board-driven program, and we have metrics that we report out quarterly to our board of directors. And we have the same pressures on us to achieve our supplier diversity targets as any other committee of the board: governance, finance, HR, you name it. So we have we track a lot of metrics around our diverse spend. Some of the main ones are around, obviously, the total diverse spend across all the companies that we own, as well as we break it apart by ethnicity and gender and certification type. And Danny, that's helpful to us. We we leverage the data that's in the supplier portal, supplier onboarding tool that we have through Apex to help us gain some of that reporting. And we thought we have a pretty good program. We interview all of our suppliers. We have all their certifications on file. But we put the Apex portal in place. We re-registered all of our longtime suppliers that had been suppliers at Independence for 30 years or more. We had everyone just re-register to make sure all their information was fresh. And we found a few $1 million of recurring spend for companies that were diverse that we weren't tracking. We didn't realize they were diverse. It could have been that they sold their company since after they registered with us, or whatever the reason may have been. But we found some sustainable spend that came through that portal. So refreshing that data was really helpful to us. It was actually just found money. So it really helped add to our bottom line and help us achieve some of our diversity goals.
Yeah, your finding around that really kind of piqued our interest at Apex, and it got us thinking more and more about diversity data. So we've got an active program going now to add more and more third-party data sources to not only let us know which suppliers are diverse, but to confirm certification of suppliers' minority status, because what we hear is companies are a bit concerned that they're going to report a diversity number, that they're doing business with a diverse supplier, but a case where that supplier maybe is no longer diverse, and the potential reputational problems associated with that. So with these additional data sources and enriching our database, it should be easier for companies to identify more and more diverse suppliers, search them out, and then authenticate their diversity status.
Even beyond that is I do a lot of consulting to other large organizations within our region about how to grow their supplier diversity program, and in many cases set it up. And one of the first things that I tell all those organizations is you don't know what your goal should be until you know where you're at. So you need to look at your current suppliers. You have diverse spend today, you just don't know it. So if they were able to put a tool in there to check their data, they would automatically be able to see their baseline of where they're at, and then look at commodities and put a plan together to go from where they're at to grow their program on a yearly basis and put some strategy behind it. But to your point, I do think that those tools, especially with all that's happened in the country over the last year, there's a lot more interest around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think this, doing the supplier portal, having the suppliers re-register as well as new ones would give you a really good handle on where you're at from a diversity perspective.
Yeah, there's been a big push around diversity and inclusion, but tied in with that is also the need to get local providers of goods and services. And so sometimes those programs can really work well together. And I think that's been driving a lot of interest in this as well. Well, thank you, Chuck and Andrew, for sharing just such interesting data and the great stories of success that you have so far. Now we'll go to the Q&A section of our presentation. We've had a lot of great questions coming in. And again, if you in the audience have any other questions, just raise them through the chat function in the WebEx window. And also, you should have a poll in front of you now. We just like to throw this up to give you the opportunity to request more information around Apex solutions and best practices. So if you have additional interest, just check as many of these items that you want and submit. So with that, I'll go to the questions that have come in. Let's see. First question is for Chuck. Chuck, you mentioned early payment discounts as a strategy that you're using. Can you talk more about really what is that? What are the dynamic discounts and maybe any additional learnings? You mentioned a surprise around the types of suppliers that were participating, but maybe just give a quick description of how the program works.
Yeah, certainly. Again, thanks. How the program works is, let's just at a real high level. Dynamic discounting was new to me too when it was first brought to me by Apex. But typically you would set up a static discount where you would have a contract where a supplier may agree to a discount for say net 15 or net 10 payment terms at say a 2 or 3% discount. And it would be static. And what I mean by that is you set the profile up on your ERP, and when an invoice came in, as long as it was approved on time, which frequently it may not be, you'd be able to apply a discount to that invoice and pay the supplier early. With dynamic discounting, what's nice is as soon as the invoice is approved, the supplier gets a notice from the Apex portal saying, hey, there's an invoice here. If you'd like to be paid early, select when you want to be paid, and it calculates a discount. So the supplier can look at their invoice or many of their invoices and say they're looking for $10,000 in cash. They could pick the various discounts per invoice on the screen, hit the button when they hit $10,000 and hit submit. And then the next day, they would receive an ACH payment of $10,000. Frequently, especially for small suppliers, those discounts are less than they can borrow money at a bank. So it's very attractive. It's also attractive to our diverse suppliers that have trouble with access to capital. They may need the money to float their business. It might not have anything to do with our account, but maybe another company that they're supplying goods or services to isn't paying on time and they need the cash for payroll, whatever the case may be. So that's how the program works. The other part of it is that you had asked about the surprises. We had a supplier that we had no idea that would take a discount, and it was such a significant discount per month, a few $1,000s a month worth of a discount for a large supplier. We actually called them to see if they made a mistake when they clicked the button, because we didn't want to have to do a refund for a few months because somebody clicked the wrong button and they took these big discounts. They're like, no, we love it. We'll take it every month. And it's been a few years, and we'd love to see it on the report every month. And then there's been some small suppliers that we thought would take a discount that aren't interested. So again, my message there is offer dynamic discount to every supplier in the database. You'll be surprised who takes it.
Yeah, what we found with time working with IBX and with other companies is that the motivations that a supplier may have for taking an early payment are not what you would expect, and they're very diverse. And very early on, we heard a lot of procurement leaders say, I don't want to do business with a supplier that wants an early payment. That tells me that they're a high-risk supplier. But actually, that's not what it tells you. We found that depending on whether the supplier is a private or a public company, sometimes public companies are trying to hit a quarter earnings announcement or profitability announcement target, and this gives them a way to meet those goals. Sometimes they're, especially very high growth companies, service providers in particular that are growing really quickly, they can make so much more money by reinvesting in their business so that they can expand their business versus what the discount cost would be. Just those 1 or 2 weeks or maybe a month early payment makes a huge difference to them. And so it's kind of a way of supporting your supplier while also getting a cost of goods sold benefit on your side. And then also for companies, sometimes if you're the buyer in the transaction, your own working capital situation might change. We saw this a lot last year too. COVID hit and some companies said, treasurers said, wait, we can't make any payments early for a bit. And so with the right dynamic discounting solution, you can pull in third-party funding to support your supplier's working capital needs, continuing to make those early payments, but you as the buyer continue to make payments according to the normal, your normal payment terms with the supplier. So with the right solution, you've got the flexibility to support your working capital needs and those of your supplier.
You know what we did too, Danny, is one other benefit is when we put the system in place, we pushed out 45-day payment terms from net 30 to net 45. That's in all of our contracts. And then we just tell suppliers that are interested in early pay, go to the portal, pick what you like. So that way, contractually, it cleaned up our contracts with just one standard payment term. We stayed firm on it. We had our CFO and president's support. And so we just, that's how we managed it. And it's really worked out well.
That's great. And Chuck, we were talking earlier about some other language that you have with your suppliers where you basically say, listen, because due to phishing and the rise of opportunities for fraud, we just don't take changes to your profile over the phone or through our help desk anymore. So you want to just talk a little bit about that and the impact that sort of portal-based control has had.
Yes, certainly, Danny. What we do is, if a supplier reaches out to us and wants to change their bank account, anything really on their profile, they have to log into the portal. So we just tell them that we'll re-email the credentials back out to them. Then they have to log in, set up their password, and then re-log into the system. And update their information. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the portal, it's basically like when you do online shopping, when you set up an account and you put your shipping, your charge card, you update your information. The portal is the same way. There's more information there, but it works in the same manner. So you go on, set up your username, password. If you forget it, there's a way to reset it. And that way we just avoid, fraud, potential for fraud with phishing attempts. Give you a rough idea, Independence gets attacked about 300 times a day, 7 days a week. So we have some of the most sensitive information. We have your health information combined with your banking information, with your personal identifiable, address, all that type, social security number, all that health insurance companies have behind their firewall. So we take security very serious.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think that we're approaching the top of the hour. That's probably the last question we should take. I will say for everyone on the call, if you attended today's session, you're going to receive an emailed link to download the full report that has many more insights than we discussed today. And it should be ready sometime next week. So keep your eye out for that. Of course, I just want to thank Chuck again for sharing the Independence Blue Cross story, and really thank Andrew for sharing the results of the research, really conducting the research and being such a great partner and voice for your procurement stakeholders. Thanks again for participating, and if you have any other questions, just continue to submit them or reach out to any of us directly. We'll be happy to share the information that we have. So thanks again, everyone, and keep an eye out for the link and upcoming webinars.
Thank you.